Hello again everyone, hope everyone is well. This is Dulu at Dulu's Reactions, reacting to another video. Please do like, like, share and subscribe, as I always forget to say, so I thought I'd say it at the beginning. And if you do want to make a contribution which will help me carry on doing these videos, there's a link to Coffee below. Pay whatever you can in whichever currency is the most easiest for you. So today I'm going to be doing a reaction to Shashi Tharoor, who used to be an Indian MP, used to be an Indian minister actually, government minister, I think for the Congress Party, and is still in the Congress Party at the moment in opposition. And I think he did a short sort of presentation about does Britain owe reparations to India because Britain, of course, as we know, colonized India, Bangladesh and Pakistan for about just under 200 years, and should the British be liable to pay compensation money, if you like, to modern Indians, Bangladeshis and Pakistanis. So yeah, I mean, let's watch the video together and see what he has to say. And I'll add my comments in between. I'll try not to talk for too long because I can go on if I really want to. But let's watch it together. So here's the video. We'll just get started.
Madam President, and gentlemen, ladies of the House, standing here with 8 minutes in my hands and at this venerable and rather magnificent institution, I was going to assure you that I belong to the Henry VIII School of Public Speaking, that as Henry VIII said to his wives, I shall not keep you long. But now finding myself...
Just very quickly, I mean, just from his accent, even though I think he was born in India, I think he's from the south of India as well. He seems, just from his accent, he seems very anglicised, despite not being English or British. So, it's just a bit of a strange one, but no, very good.
But now finding myself the 7th speaker out of 8 in what must already seem a rather long evening to you, I rather feel like Henry VIII's last wife. I more or less know what's expected of me, but I'm not sure how to do it any differently.
Sorry guys, just checking I was recording, otherwise it would be a waste of time really, and you won't be able to see anything. Carry on.
Perhaps what I should do is really try and pay attention, know what's expected of me in what must already seem a rather long evening to you. I rather feel like Henry VIII's last wife. I more or less know what's expected of me, but I'm not sure how to do it any differently. Perhaps what I should do is really try and pay attention to the arguments that were advanced by the opposition today. We had, for example, Sir Richard Ottaway suggesting, challenging the very idea that it could be argued that the economic situation of the colonies was actually worsened by the experience of British colonialism. Well, I stand to offer you the Indian example, Sir Richard. India's share of the world economy when Britain arrived on its shores was 23%. By the time the British left, it was down to below 4%. Why?
I mean, that's very interesting. Just to give some context to this, roughly America now is, I think it's around, don't quote me exactly, around 24 to 26% of the entire world economy. So these are huge numbers, and unlike many other parts of the world that were colonized, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, because don't forget, when they say India, they actually mean India, Bangladesh, Pakistan. Because before, when the British came, it was that landmass, or the Indian subcontinent, that they eventually managed to take over. So that's what we're talking about. But as I was saying, compared to other countries that were colonized, India is a special case, as is the case with China, because these were actually huge economies and a great part of the world economy and world politics for thousands of years. So it wasn't as though they came into this poor country and managed to civilize it or increase its wealth in any way, shape or form. I think quite the contrary was done. Its civilization, especially its disunity that happened based on religious reasons, was, I believe, a direct result of the British officially trying to separate out Muslims from Hindus and Sikhs and Buddhists, etc., and even trying to separate the different castes in India amongst Hinduism. So India is a very special case. It was a huge economy. India, Bangladesh, Pakistan was a huge economy before the British came. So it wasn't as though, oh, they only had a slight impact on it. They had a massive impact on the economy. But let's just see what he has to say as well.
Because India had been governed for the benefit of Britain. Britain's rise for 200 years was financed by its depredations in India. In fact, Britain's industrial revolution was actually premised upon the deindustrialization of India. The handloom weavers, for example, famed across the world, whose products were exported around the world, Britain came right in. There were actually these weavers making fine muslin, light as woven air, it was said. And Britain came right in, smashed their thumbs, broke their looms, imposed tariffs and duties on their cloth and products, and started, of course, taking the raw materials from India and shipping back manufactured cloth, flooding the world's markets with what became the products of the dark and satanic mills of Victorian England.
The muslin that he's talking about was especially a feature of Bengal, what is now sort of Calcutta and modern-day Bangladesh. The muslin from there was very, very famous, and was exported worldwide. And Bengal was actually at one stage, especially in the medieval period, the richest part of India. A lot of people perhaps don't realise this, but the British came and saw to that, I can assure you.
That meant that the weavers in India became beggars, and India went from being a world-famous exporter of finished cloth into an importer, went from having 27% of world trade to less than 2%. Meanwhile, colonialists like Robert Clive bought their rotten boroughs in England on the proceeds of their loot in India, while taking the Hindi word loot into their dictionaries as well as their habits.
Should I switch to Monday CRM? Update.
Sorry guys, we were rudely interrupted by an ad and I was checking
Loot
my messages
into their
as well,
dictionaries
quickly.
as well as their habits. And the British had the gall to call him Clive of India, as if he belonged to the country, when all he really did was to ensure that much of the country belonged to him. By the end of the 19th century, the fact is that India was already Britain's biggest cash cow, the world's biggest purchaser of British goods and exports, and the source of highly paid employment for British civil servants. We literally paid for our own oppression.
Now, that phrase, we literally paid for our own oppression. I have my thoughts on this as to who is to blame. And it's not the usual fashionable criticism, oh, the British or this colonizer or that colonizer. Empires have existed since the dawn of civilization itself in West Asia. What we now ridiculously call the Middle East, which is a non-geographic term anyway. Empires have existed even when the British were scratching around for food, on the land as barbarians and unlettered peoples. So I don't have the traditional view of, oh, this European country, that European country came in and stole all this stuff. It's also it begs the question: what were the people who were colonized, especially in countries like China and India, which are amazing parts of world economy and world history? Why were they so disunited, and why did many of them actually, especially in the case of India, go along with the British invaders and help to cement the British rule there? As many people may or may not know, there was something called the British Indian Army, and it was an army made up of Indians, Bangladeshis and Pakistanis, and especially from the north of India and bits of Pakistan. There were lots of people in the army, in the British Indian Army, who helped, believe it or not, defeat other Indian armies when they did want to revolt against the British. So the picture is not as clear cut as you may assume. The blame does lie a lot on the peoples and the leaders of India at that time. So it's not a fashionable view, but it's actually historically accurate. But that's my gripe of the day. We'll carry on. I'll try not to say too much, by the way. I'll try and listen.
And as has been pointed out, the wealthy Victorian British families that made their money out of the slave economy. 1/5 of the elites of the wealthy class in Britain in the 19th century owed their money to transporting 3 million Africans across the waters. And in fact, in 1833, when slavery was abolished, What happened was that a compensation of £20 million was paid, not as reparations to those who had lost their lives or who had suffered or been oppressed by slavery, but to those who had lost their property. I was struck by the fact that your Wi-Fi password at this union commemorates the name of Mr. Gladstone, the great liberal hero. Well, I'm sorry, his family was one of those who benefited from this compensation. Staying with India, between 15 and 29 million Indians died of starvation in British-induced famines. The most famous example, of course, was the Great Bengal Famine during the Second World War, when 4 million people died because Winston Churchill deliberately, as a matter of written minuted policy, proceeded to divert essential supplies from civilians in Bengal to sturdy Tommies and Europeans as reserve stockpiles. He said that the starvation of anyway underfed Bengalis mattered much less than that of sturdy Greeks. This is Churchill's actual quote. And when conscience-stricken British officials wrote to him, pointing out that people were dying because of this decision, he peevishly wrote in the margins of the file, "Why hasn't Gandhi died yet?" So all notions that the British...
Yes, I mean, that's a good point. Many people forget about the Bengal famine that happened. I think it was 1943. I think he said. I think it was mid-40 during the Second World War. Which, incidentally, Indians, Bangladesh, and Pakistanis were actually contributing to, and were part of the army as well, fighting Hitler and fighting Mussolini, and the Japanese, ironically. But I know it's again fashionable to blame, say, the colonizer, and there is a lot of blame there. But also you have to look at the leadership in India at the time, who were very divided, very communal, and that sort of kept the British going there for just under 200 years. So it's important to put everything in perspective, really.
Were trying to do their colonial enterprise out of enlightened despotism, to try and bring the benefits of colonialism and civilization to the benighted heathen. I'm sorry, Churchill's conduct in 43 simply one example of many that gave a lie to this myth. As others have said on the proposition, violence and racism were the reality of the colonial experience. And no wonder that the sun never set on the British Empire, because even God couldn't trust the English in the dark. Let me take World War I as a very concrete example, since the first speaker, Mr. Lee, suggested these things couldn't be quantified. Well, let me quantify World War I for you. Again, I'm sorry, from an Indian perspective, others have spoken of other countries. 1/6 of all the British forces that fought in the war were Indian.
By the way, he keeps on saying Indian. He means Indian, Bangladeshis, Pakistanis, because that was the Indian subcontinent. It later, after 47, 48, obviously split up. But he should make that clearer, I think. Either he's forgetting or he's willfully ignoring that aspect. But yeah, when he says Indian, he should be saying Indian, Bangladeshi, and Pakistani in the modern sense. But we'll allow him that error.
54,000 Indians actually lost their lives in that war. 65,000 were wounded. Another 4,000 remained missing or in prison. Indian taxpayers had to cough up £100 million in that time's money. India supplied 70 million rounds of ammunition, 600,000 rifles and machine guns, 42 million garments were stitched and sent out of India, and 1.3 million Indian personnel served in this war. I know all this because, of course, the commemoration of the centenary has just taken place. But
just out of interest, even in my own family, which I only found out recently, from what is now Bangladesh, of course, used to be Bengal and part of India before 48. There's, on my mother's side, one of her uncles, I think, also was in the British Indian Army during the Second World War. I know he's talking about the First World War, but in the Second World War. And another relative of ours, my dad only told me a few years ago actually, had also fought in the Second World War in the British Indian Army, and he's buried somewhere in, I don't know, somewhere in southern Russia or Central Asia or somewhere, which was really weird. I mean, God knows where it is, but it just brings history to life sometimes when you find out these little tidbits of family history, and so it's very, very interesting. And we'll carry on.
Not just that, India had to supply 173,000 animals, 370 million tons of supplies, and in the end, the total value of everything that was taken out of India. India, by the way, suffering from recession at that time and poverty and hunger, was, in today's money, 8 billion pounds. You want quantification? It's available. Second World War, it was even worse, 2.5 million Indians in uniform. I won't belabor the point, but of Britain's total war debt of 3 billion pounds, in 1945 money, 1.25 billion was owed to India and never actually paid. Somebody mentioned Scotland. Well, the fact is that colonialism actually cemented your union with Scotland. You know, the Scots had actually tried to send colonies out before 1707. They'd all failed, I'm sorry to say.
I'm sure he's not sorry to say that at all. He's being sarcastic there. I love the Scots. They're wonderful people, but they really, really did benefit massively from the British Empire, you know, on the backs of the English, and going along with all their schemes. Because after the Act of Union, which I think with Scotland was 1707, if I remember correctly, it became, if you like, one country, with the English being the dominant factor and predominant factor actually, and you know, they did want to keep the Scots and the Welsh and the Irish. In those days would have been what is now the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. They would, you know, the English always sort of fed them the tidbits and tried to keep them happy by letting them amass wealth in their various colonies, and India was the richest colony they had, and in fact one of the richest countries. India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, one of the richest civilizations in human history actually, along with China and other civilizations as well, of course. So Scotland did very well out of it. Nothing to do with the modern Scots, of course. No blame there. I'm not one of those who, you know, keeps on wanting to blame others and punish the current generation. Nothing to do with the modern Scots, but historically they did benefit a great deal going along with the English.
But then, of course, came Union, and India was available, and there you had a disproportionate employment of Scots. I'm sorry, Mr. Mackenzie has to speak after me. Engaged in this colonial enterprise as soldiers, as merchants, as agents, as employees, and the earnings from India is what brought prosperity to Scotland, even pulled Scotland out of poverty. Now that India is no longer there, no wonder the bonds are loosening. Now, we've heard other arguments on this side. There's been a mention of the railways. Well, let me tell you, first of all, as my colleague, the Jamaican High Commissioner, has pointed out, railways and roads were really built to serve British interests and not those of the local people. But I might add that many countries have built railways and roads without having had to be colonized in order to do so.
Have a look at this. I've just checked to see if we were affected.
Right, we're back. Sorry, got interrupted by the rude adverts again. How dare they? Right, here we go.
They were designed to carry raw materials from the hinterland into the ports to be shipped to Britain. And the fact is that the Indian or Jamaican or other colonial public, their needs were incidental. Transportation, there was no attempt made to match supply to demand for mass transport, none whatsoever. Instead, in fact, the Indian railways were built with massive incentives offered by Britain to British investors, guaranteed out of Indian taxes paid by Indians, with the result that you actually had 1 mile of Indian railway costing twice what it cost to build the same mile in Canada or Australia, because there was so much money being paid in extravagant returns. Britain made all the profits, controlled the technology, supplied all the equipment, and absolutely all these benefits came as private enterprise, British private enterprise, at public risk, Indian public risk. That was the railways as an accomplishment. We're hearing about aid. I think it was again Sir Richard Ottaway who mentioned British aid to India. Well, let me just point out that British aid to India is about 0.4% of India's GDP. The government of India actually spends more on fertilizer subsidies, which might be an appropriate metaphor for that argument. If I may point out as well, that that as my fellow speakers from the proposition have pointed out, there have been incidents of racial violence, of loot, of massacres, of bloodshed, of transportation, in India's case, even of one of our last Mughal emperor. Yes, maybe today's Britons are not responsible for some of these depredations, but the same speakers have pointed with pride to their foreign aid. You're not responsible for the people starving in Somalia, but you give them aid. Surely the principle of reparations for the wrongs that have been done cannot be denied. It's been pointed out, for example, the dehumanization of Africans in the Caribbean, the massive psychological damage that has been done, the undermining of social traditions, of property rights, of the authority structures of these societies, all in the interests of British colonialism. And the fact remains that many of today's problems in these countries, including the persistence, in some cases the creation of racial and ethnic and religious tensions, were the direct result of the colonial experience. So there is a moral debt that needs to be paid. Someone challenged reparations elsewhere. Well, I'm sorry, Germany doesn't just give reparations to Israel. It also gave reparations to Poland. Perhaps some of the speakers here are too young to remember the dramatic picture of Chancellor Willy Brandt on his knees in the Warsaw Ghetto in 1970. And there are other examples. There is Italy's reparations to Libya. There's Japan's to Korea. Even Britain has paid reparations to the New Zealand Maoris. So it's not as if this is something unprecedented or unheard of that's going to somehow open some sort of nasty Pandora's box. No wonder Professor Lewis reminded us that he's from Texas. There's a wonderful expression in Texas that summarizes the arguments of the opposition: all hat and no cattle.
Want to make your money work harder for you? Then don't let another year.
Sorry guys, that was a good joke actually. All hat and no cattle. There we go. Yeah, that's a good one. Right, we'll just carry on.
If I can just quickly look through the other notes I was scribbling while they were speaking. There was reference to democracy and rule of law. Let me say with the greatest possible respect, it's a bit rich to oppress, enslave, kill, torture, maim people for 200 years and then celebrate the fact that they're democratic at the end of it.
I've always found that one of the most ridiculous and one of the most hypocritical reasons for even modern powerful countries and superpowers like the USA and other countries going into someone else's country. Oh, we're going to bring democracy for them. No, you don't. That's not what your intent is. You're there to make them weaker and to make your country stronger. And you can use any excuse you want. Which country wants another country to be stronger, richer and more powerful than them? The answer is none, because human nature is we always want to do better than the next guy or gal. It's just human nature. There's nothing evil about it. It's just human nature. What is evil is when you through sheer hypocrisy pretend otherwise. Oh, we want to bring democracy, we want to bring freedom. No, you don't. You want to rape that country, take its resources and make yourself even more powerful. That's all it is. So it's the hypocrisy that really gets me about world history, and all powers throughout human history have done this. It's not just this country or that country. It's all powers, and it just baffles me and astounds me how hypocritical powerful nations can be. It's just quite amazing. Happens over and over again, by the way.
We were denied democracy, sir. We had to snatch it, seize it from you. With the greatest reluctance, it was conceded in India's case after 150 years of British rule, and that too with limited franchise. Yes, indeed, ma'am.
The opposition spoke quite highly of Greek and Athenian democracy on which the West should pride itself, and spoke of liberty and equality in that same name. The Athenian democracy was only functioning because of the slave society on which it was built. That's the nature of colonisation.
All right, I don't think that needs contradiction, not from me at any rate. But if I may just point out, I think the argument made by a couple of the speakers, the first speaker, Mr. Lee in particular, conceded all the evil atrocities of colonialism, but essentially suggested that reparations won't really help. They won't help the right people. They'll be used as a propaganda tool. They'll embolden people like Mr. Mugabe. It's always nice how in the old days, I'm sorry to say that the people of the Caribbean used to frighten their children into behaving and sleeping by saying Sir Francis Drake would come after them. That was a legacy of that. Now it's Mugabe will be there. So this is the new sort of Sir Francis Drake of our times. The fact is, The fact is very simply, sir, that we are not talking about reparations as a tool to empower anybody. They're a tool for you to atone for the wrongs that have been done. And I am quite prepared to accept the proposition that you can't evaluate, put a monetary sum on the kinds of horrors people have suffered. Certainly no amount of money can expiate the loss of a loved one, as somebody pointed out there. You're not going to be able to figure out an exact amount. But the principle is what matters. The fact is that to speak blithely of sacrifices on both sides, as an analogy was used here, a burglar comes into your house, ransacks the place, stubs his toe, and you say, well, there was a sacrifice on both sides. That, I'm sorry to say, is not an acceptable argument. The truth is that we are not arguing specifically that vast sums of money need to be paid. The proposition before this House is the principle of owing reparations, not the fine points of how much is owed, to whom it should be paid. The question is there a debt? Does Britain owe reparations? As far as I'm concerned, the ability to acknowledge a wrong that has been done, to simply say sorry, will go a far, far, far longer way than some percentage of GDP in the form of aid. What is required, it seems to me, is accepting the principle that reparations are owed. Personally, I'd be quite happy if it was £1 a year for the next 200 years after the last 200 years of Britain and India. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Okay, well, that was good. Yeah, that was very good. This way, yeah. Yeah, that was a really good speech, actually, very well delivered. And I've made some of my comments and some of my views known on this. Ultimately, it's about the disunity within a country that allows others to come from outside and take over your land and, exploit its resources. That's been the human, history for thousands of years. I'm afraid it's nothing new. The Europeans were the last people to do it, if you like. Which is why we talk about them a lot more. But other empires have done exactly the same, if not worse. On the issue of reparations, I don't believe in all this. I think it just it's impossible to determine where do you stop, which empire pays which people, and everyone can claim against everyone. The British or the English can complain against the Dutch for invading this country in 1689, or the Normans or the Romans or whoever. Where does it stop? The answer is nowhere, because you really can't find a beginning or an end. As far as I'm concerned, the main thing is to look at the future, and for those countries to get themselves united and to improve themselves militarily and economically, and try not to rely too much on others. We all need each other, of course. You can't do it otherwise. But improve your own strength. Learn from the lessons of history. Don't be disunited, and stop blaming other peoples for your ills. Countries shouldn't, and civilizations, if they do that, they won't advance. But that's my 2 pennies worth, as we say in English. But yeah, it's a great video, very well delivered, and yeah, it's nice to have a refresher on what actually happened, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. Do like, share and subscribe, and please do make a contribution if you can, whatever amount you can, and the link for coffee is down below. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye for now from Dulu at Dulu's Reactions. Bye bye.